Okay. I think we've got it figured out for maybe the next 30 minutes. Now, we were on the other video that is long gone. We were discussing problem solving. And everyone in life, whether they realize it or not, is going to solve problems. Big ones, little ones, monumentally massive, gargantuan ones. Doesn't matter. A problem is a problem, right? Or an issue, depending on how you frame it. And however you frame it is fine. The steps are pretty much the same. To and this first step is kind of obvious, obviously. Identify you have a problem, right? Um, because if you don't think it's a problem, it's just going to stay there, right? And it could disrupt more things in your life, not just the small little part it is when it's tiny. The bigger it gets, the more it's going to disrupt your day to day life, your functioning, your decision making, your job, your family, right? And we talked about this before about the snowball effect. And I like to use that because it's something simple that almost everyone can visualize, right? You're in an area where it snows and you're right, and you got the snow coming down, and every little individual flake is something happening in your life. And as the flakes fall down individually, they begin to pile up, right? Kind of like a blizzard or a snowstorm, right? But it's not always a bad blizzard, it's just a lot. Well, a problem is when something, someone, or an issue comes along and scoops up that snow and makes a snowball. It's big, it's huge, it's hard, and it's difficult to manage, right? Or the snowball comes rolling down the hill because the snow at the top of the mountain got so heavy that it just came rolling down, right? And the more that it rolled, the more snowflakes it picked up, the more things it did, the more damage it did, right? Knocking down trees and pushing rocks and, or the more damage it did when somebody threw the snowball at you, right? Hit you in the side of the head, that kind of thing. Now, if you have a problem, the first thing you should do is identify that it's a problem, right? And say, this is a problem because I could no longer do X, Y, and Z. Or so for some reason I'm really struggling, but I don't know why. Here's the problem, X, Y, Z. Okay? Excuse me. And after you identify the problem, for some people it's good to write it down on paper. Other people have apps on their phones. However it works for you is fine, right? Because whatever can keep you focused on task and chipping away at the problem is a good thing. Now, the first step after identifying, so I guess it would be step 2, is to look at the problem and say, what skills do I have? What skills, what resources? Ask yourself a series of questions. What skills do I have? What resources do I have access to? Is there going to, how can I use those skills and resources to chip away a little bit at a time to this problem? And right, that's step 2. Step 3, if it's a huge problem, like something that affects your day-to-day life, your job, your family, this step works relatively well if you're motivated enough to do it. And this is where self-motivation kind of comes in as a parent and a human in life. Write down or use your phone, an app or whatever, the little steps you want to take to eventually solve this problem. Now, keep this in mind. The steps and things like that work for monumental, gargantuan problems. Little problems, right? You may not have to write down some steps. You may just say, oh, here's the problem, and know that you have the skills and the resources to solve it within a day or a week or something, a shorter amount of time. And if that's the case, wonderful, wonderful. Very proud of you for having that skill set. But even on small problems, if you don't have that skill set, no worries. No worries, because this will help you develop and grow that skill set. Okay? So back to step 3, write down a series of small little things that you can do to chip away at it, right? So let's say it's I'm not sure, a problem at a school, right? Let's go with the parent route. It's a problem at the school. So the first step you should do is make contact, whether it be phone, email, in person, anything like that. But your first step is to make contact, right? Because something happened at the school and your child says this, and you're like, okay, all right, that's, because as a parent, you want to get both sides. So you want contact the school or contact the teacher. And you can set these little goals, these little steps up, and word them however you need. Word them with words you understand. Word them with just one word, that, something to jog your memory, however you want to do it. Okay. And then underneath that, contact school. Underneath that, patiently wait on response. Right. And then the second step would be, okay, you have your information. They've told you their side. Your child told you their side. Now you have to figure out, okay, request paperwork, for example. Request camera footage if your child's school has camera. That way you can verify side A or side B. Now, obviously, as a parent, you're going to believe your child. Not a problem. So you might want to set these steps up to not go against the school, but to protect your child, protect yourself, but still hear the school's side of it, right? Don't seem so, I don't believe you, don't seem so argumentative, right? So we want to make sure that our steps work, okay? And I've actually done this a lot of times when we used brick and mortar, and sometimes it was really hard to stay on the steps because it was a big incident and it was very emotional for us, but I kept plugging away, right? And then after so long, I didn't even need my little goal sheet. I learned the skill of how to solve it or how to solve a problem similar to that. And then I adapted that into small problems, big problems, But anyway, refocus. So once I got through that step, then, it sometimes can get a little foggy with the steps you write down at the beginning. And then when you get to that step, you're like, okay, well, these two things are different because the information is different. The environment's different. The people are different. So this particular step may not apply. That's okay. You may have to reorder your steps a little bit in the process. Okay. And that's a little skill where you can teach yourself or even teach your child by example, adaptability, right? Because you're going into this with kind of a one-track mind of this is what I was told that the problem is, so I'm basing it on this information, right? And going through those other things, getting more information, getting more about people involved may change the steps you have originally written down. And that's okay, right? Because your large goal is still the same, solving this problem, right? But the steps to get there can change. So you're on step 2 and then you go to step 3 and you're like, oh, well, this is different than what I thought. So you may have to, what I call, temporarily retreat to readjust. Retreat to readjust that next step. And that's okay. You just can't retreat and stay there and let the problem grow. You can't let the problem get worse, right? So you temporarily retreat, figure it out, and then come back, right? And it's not so much we want to attack the problem. It's that we want to repair it, right? We want to repair the problem and then repair the smaller little problems that it caused, right? Like a ripple in a pond. Because no matter what people may say, if someone in the family or someone that you know is having a problem in your inner circle, eventually it does affect everyone, you know? And no matter how hard people want to believe that somebody's problem is somebody's problem, yes, they are responsible for fixing it themselves because it is their problem, but it eventually will affect what you're doing. And that's not a good thing because your problems will eventually do that too. And what happens when we get a lot of snowflakes or a lot of ripples? There's no peace. There's always anger and problems and frustration because, you know, everybody's overall each other and it's always tumultuous. Yeah, big word. Which means tumultuous means not so peaceful, very all over the place, scattered with frustration type deal. Okay, so once you regroup at step 3, if you have to, then you would go to step 4, step 5. And keep in mind, you can have as many steps as you need, right? You can have 50 steps. I mean, that may be a bit much, but you could break them down into tiny little steps. You know, day 1, call this person, call this person, call this person. You know what I mean? Break it down into days. You can break it down into steps. You can break it down into goals. You can even call them little goals. My goal is to, fix this issue, but I have little mini goals to get there, right? So identify the problem, right? Write down little mini goals or steps to start figuring out the details. And then once you get to a certain point and you feel you have all the information or you have, certain things from both sides or from your side to say a company side, it just depends. You could even be one of those sides. Once you have almost completed those steps or completed them, now you have to look at how to prevent. And you can't always prevent every single problem. Even if it's like you've repaired the problem and things are peaceful, nice and smooth, and the snow surface is good, or the pond. No, that problem may pop up again 6 months, 8 months, right? But you would have the steps, right? So you could go back and grab your steps and your app and your paper and you can say, oh, this problem's coming back. Now, and that happens even with prevention. But once you have mitigated, solved, repaired the problem, your next step should be prevention. And I know that is a huge, monumental, hard thing to understand. But let me break it down as simply as I can. If you know that something comes up on a regular basis that stresses you out, that causes problems, say certain times of year, certain times of month, and you want to prevent that, then what you need to do is once you've solved that problem for the first time, sit down again with your app, your paper, notepad, whatever, and look at and ask yourself, what can I do to prevent this from happening again? Or what can I do to make it less stressful? What habits can I change? What steps could I take in my daily life? Um, what signs should I look for that this is becoming a problem again? Any questions like that can help you figure out, oh, I solved this 4 months ago, but here it's coming back for a reason. But okay, I know how to do it again. Because sometimes you experience problems from other people, other corporations, and that's out of your control, right? People come in and take your piece, and they're like, these are the rules. This is what you have to do to continue this or do this or do this. And you're like, oh, okay, but that's very stressful for me, but I got it. Here I go. Right? Because you have all of your tools in your toolbox and you can just pull it out and say, there it is. But you can also know that if it's something that recurs often, that stresses you out, or something that just you seem to have solved it, but then it just kind of keeps popping back up sporadically, make another list on your app, on your phone, on the wall, on a pegboard, whatever, that says, look for these signs, and then list your signs, right? Maybe do a check-in with the company, the school, your workmate, whatever, right? Do a check-in every so often. Say, hey, how's it going? Is everything okay? Do we need to call a meeting? Do you want to take a lunch and talk about it? You see what I'm saying? Maintenance, basically problem maintenance before it breaks. And then pretty soon that will also become habit, right? Prevention of small problems growing big. And like I said, some small problems you can solve in a day or so with just a series of phone calls, emails, maybe a face-to-face meeting. It just depends on what the problem is and who is involved, right? Because obviously some things with companies you can't like go to their office and sit in the waiting area and have a face-to-face meeting with this $1 million company. You can't do that. But you can schedule a meeting at a school, right? With a teacher, with the principal, other administration. But you can do that. And then once you have solved it, right? So we're identifying, taking steps to solve the problem, and then we're working on preventative maintenance, or at least regular maintenance to keep the problem as manageable as possible for when it does occur again, right? Because we all have problems, and from something as small as utility bills that happen every month to a very stressful meeting with, say, your boss at work, and it happens like clockwork. But to take the steps to maybe do a little bit of self-care before that, apply some sort of small steps to mitigate that stress when you have to meet with your boss. But it's all the same. The whole concept is the same no matter what the problem is, right? So utility bills, for example, if you know approximately how much they are, budget for that, set the money aside. And that way oh, I just got my $2,000 electric bill. I know it's no joke in today's world, but anyway, refocus. You set the money aside, and that way when the bill comes, you do not get so overwhelmed that it's expensive. Because you either have all of the payment or you have at least some of the payment and are able to get the rest, right? And the example with the boss, do a little bit of self-care maybe at lunch before, or if the meeting's first thing in the morning, do a little bit in your car, listen to something that calms you or pumps you up or whatever it is before you go into that meeting. See? Big problems don't require always big solutions. Sometimes you can chip away at them and they get smaller and smaller. Okay. And then if you maintain it, right, you figure out what you need to do on your end. That problem doesn't seem so overwhelming when it does occur. Now, there are some problems in life that are one and done, right? One and done. Or one and spread very far out, right? But this method can also apply to those because you have basic steps for a lot of this. Um, and for problems that are one and done or one and very spread out, you don't always have to have that regular maintenance. You just at this point have to watch for signs that it's trying to sneak back in. And, some of this part you may not be able to memorize or recognize the signs right away as they kind of creep in. So maybe keep like a little journal, an app, something that'll trigger, remember, oh, I remember last time that this part happened. It became a problem down here. You see what I mean? So if you recognize the sign that this is becoming a problem, you can apply the list method and fix it before it becomes a problem again, right? Preventative maintenance. And that's just basically problem solving. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is even small problems sometimes take a lengthy amount of time, right? Big problems, small problems, intermediate problems, whatever type of or size the problem is, because many times there's two people involved. You, another party, you, another company, your child, another child, right? So everyone that's involved in the problem, or, every step you have to do, even if it's an individual problem, takes time, right? So, for example, the one with the school. If your child comes home and tells you something and you call the school, that teacher isn't waiting by the phone to talk to you. No, you have to take a message. The message has to go to the teacher. The teacher then has to respond either by phone or via email. You see, and it's time because the teacher has to find the time in between classes or at lunch or whatever to do it. So then they contact you back, let's request a meeting. And then you see what I mean? So it's when you're involved in a problem personally and someone else is involved in a problem personally, it's a lot of communication. And that's usually one of the biggest steps. And it just kind of happens naturally. So when you write down your personal list of how to do this problem, when you say contact teacher, right, that is automatically communication. But then what you want to communicate is more along the smaller end. And then you can go from there because then they're going to contact you back. So that first step is the back and forth of communication. And then in that instance with a school, the next step would be probably meetings and deciding, what happened, and then preventative maintenance, right? Because in those meetings, all your steps would be covered, maybe all of their steps would be covered, and then action could be taken for preventative maintenance. But that takes time. It does not happen overnight. It does not happen after the commercial break. It just, because you have to find the time, they have to find the time, you have to gather up your paperwork, they have to gather, you see, and that in itself, that waiting game, that patience game, that can be it can be frustrating. It can be overwhelming. It can be just nerve-wracking. And it's okay to feel that way because, granted, not big companies, but sometimes the people at the schools, they feel the same way, How is this parent going to react? How is this child going to react? How's this other parent going to react when the two parents get in the same room? You see what I mean? So when you're during the waiting game, right, for a response from the other party or whatever, make sure that, you're checking your list, that you're following your list that works for you. And making sure you remind yourself, I can adapt if things change. Okay. But also include a little bit of self-care. And I know everybody's harping on the self-care train, but some of the things that people are calling self-care today are not very healthy. And self-care needs to be done in a healthy way. I'm not going to get into specifics. I'm not going to sit here and be one of those people that, oh my God, this person did this and they're saying this, and in my opinion, it's wrong. No. It's just kind of common sense that it's not healthy. And I'm going to leave the definition of self-care up to you, for you. I know what it is for me. And what I know what it is for me may not work for you, and that's okay. So you decide what self-care is, as long as it's healthy. Because I want you guys to come back. I want you guys to watch my games. I want you guys to watch my vlogs and just grow as a human being and be happier. I want that. That's why I always remind everybody to eat your vegetables. Vegetables are good. And some protein. But anyway, again, refocus. So make sure that while you're waiting, if you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling something that you're going to struggle to deal with, preventative maintenance in that area is self-care. Now, granted, you can't take 3 or 4 days and ignore the communication coming from the other party, but just take an evening and just mindlessly scroll. Take an evening and read a book, right? You don't even need a screen for some self-care. You can garden, you can grow a plant, you can do what you need to do. Okay? But then always come back to finish that, right? Because the longer you leave the other party hanging, the longer this is going to drag out. We don't want that. We want it to be, right? We want it to be properly timed. I couldn't think of another word. So yeah. So problem solving is it can be very, very difficult the first few times you use my system. And if you choose not to use my system because you already have one in place and you're just here to hear my lovely voice and look at my lovely narwhal glasses, thank you. I appreciate that. Or maybe I'll say a word and you'll spark something, because I know that happens to me. Somebody will say something and I'll be like, oh, the way they do it works for them, but I can adapt this a little bit for me, or adapt this a little bit for my family, and it goes from there. And that's the way it should work, right? Nobody should ever be locked into a system that works for somebody else. You should be able to look at something and say, oh, well, they did this. Wonder if I did this, but did it this way, or added this step, or took away this step. That's the way it should work. That's the way parenting advice and any advice that another human being gives another, there should be a way to adapt it for them, like shooting off of that, right? But again, my opinion. So yeah. So let's see. Oh yeah. We only have a few minutes left. And again, I apologize for all these snafus since the beginning. It will get better, because I am problem solving and troubleshooting, and and don't forget, school's coming up in a few weeks, so my vlog time is gonna flip-flop a little bit. It'll be done later in the day versus first thing in the morning. So it's going to be an interesting time fitting everything in. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to call it for today. And I should be back tomorrow because the IRL issue has temporarily been maintenanced. Gotcha. So hopefully with the maintenance that I did, it will not be a big issue for at least a few months. But who knows, right? Nobody ever knows. All right. Well, it was really good to see everybody today. I appreciate you stopping by. Like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, whatever all of that is. Share with a friend if you know somebody struggling that maybe my little videos here could help them. Um, you know, but remember, unsolicited advice. Sometimes you just got to kind of bite that tongue. All right. Well, I will see you tomorrow. And then I think next week is the last week that it'll be in the mornings. So, but I will definitely see you tomorrow. All right. You all have a good morning, great afternoon, and a superb evening. Goodbye.